No worries, man.
Hi everyone. First an announcement, if you haven't picked up your t-shirt yet, please do so after this talk. Alright, so in 2009 we first invited maddog to speak at Reflections Projections. After 2 years of massive scheduling snafus, we're really excited to finally have him here. He's been around the ACM office for a couple of days now, sharing with us all his greatest stories about how he brews his own beer, Ethiopian currency, and his appearance in Dilbert comics. So he has probably a different story to share with us tonight about his project Cauã.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Oh, good. Okay, this is about Project Cauã, which is a project I've been working on for over 5 years. About 2 years ago, a friend of mine in Brazil heard the project and said, I think that there's certainly something behind this. And so we've been working to finalize Project Cauã and to actually bring it to pilot. I'm going to show you a little bit about what it's about and where we are with it currently. First of all, some background of various types. For those of you that don't know me, I've been in the industry for 42 years. I started programming in 1969. I've worked on a wide variety of different systems, everything from mainframes to microcomputers to embedded systems. I've worked for very large companies and very small companies. I've been a programmer, a systems administrator, marketing manager. I'm an educator. I've taught at university level. And most importantly, two things I think. I'm rather pragmatic. As an open source person, a free software person who does believe very strongly in that, I also believe that you have to get the job done. And I also believe that when somebody writes a piece of software, that they should have the right to say what happens to it. And I encourage them to license it freely, but I don't spit on them if they don't. So unlike some other free software people. And the other thing is, I've been both a vendor and a customer. So I've been the person who's been waiting for the bug fix to come along or the enhancement to come along to do my business. And I've been the person trying to create that bug fix and enhancement. And these are reasons why I believe that free software or open source is the way to go. Now, in May of 1994, I met Linus Torvalds for the first time, funded him to come to an organization called DECUS, where he talked about Linux and his project. I got him an alpha system so he could be able to take Linux to be a 64-bit system instead of 32, and to make it more device independent. I assembled an engineering team to bring that about. And finally, in 1995, we launched the Alpha Linux port. I became the executive director of Linux International, which is an organization that we try and create the things which you really need as vendors to be able to support an operating system. So we recognized that we needed to have a certification system for systems administrators, and that we spun off an organization called LPI, Linux Professional Institute, which creates certification today. We also recognized that between the different distributions, you needed to have a binary interface so that applications could run across them. And so we started the Linux Standard Base project, which continues today on creating that. We also defended the Linux trademark from attack, and we went around the world talking to governments, companies, getting them to try and understand the various business models behind free and open source. I've been doing that for about 15 years now. In 1996, I went to Brazil for the first time. I visited the University of Sao Paulo in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I saw my first real live Beowulf supercomputer at that place. I've been doing a lot of work with Brazil over the years. I've recognized that the Brazilian people are very entrepreneurial. We tend to think of countries like Brazil as being, quote, third world. Well, Brazil is really more second world, and I'll give you an example of that in a few moments. I also have a Brazilian godson, and he's 5 years old, so I have a great deal of ties to Brazil and South America. Now, there's a certain number of challenges which we have in the world today. Computers are really too hard to use, and there was a study done in Brazil as to why people weren't buying computers and using them in the home. One of them, 26% of the people said they were simply too hard to use. And desktop computers use too much electrical power. We'll get more to that later on. We'll see that. There's recycling and reuse issues around computers. We really need to conquer that, and I'll explain more about that. All of these things I'll explain in depth throughout the talk. Wireless is still not omnipresent. I'm sorry, all the telephone companies out there, wireless people out there who say wireless, wireless, wireless is the thing of the future. I've got some news for you. Laws of physics and stuff like that, and as related to all the bandwidth that people want to do to use the internet to download all the pornography that they want is just not enough, okay? And we have to fix this because everybody wants to have more pornography all the time, so we have to make it better. Supercomputing is still too hard and too expensive for small companies to be able to get access to the types of computing power they need. I know the cloud, people say cloud, 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 but I want to make it almost free for people. And finally, I would like to break the challenge that geeks are not nerds. They're not the equivalent, okay? There's geeks and there's nerds. Geeks are people who are passionate about something, knowledgeable about something, but they have other attributes to them. Sometimes they play music, sometimes they play sports. Nerds are the people who have no social skills whatsoever. Now, when I started off in computer science, we were nerds, okay? Black horn-rimmed glasses, pocket protectors, nerds, nerds, nerds. But over time, when computers come out to real people, people like you are geeks, but you also have interpersonal skills. And I believe this opens up a new opportunity, and I want to show you what that is. Now, let's take the first one, making computers easier to use. This is my mother and father. Unfortunately, this year, Mom and Dad passed away. Dad was 89, and Mom, I'm not going to say how old she was because she still wouldn't like it. She'd come back from the dead to haunt me if I told her. But these people, I gave them a computer. They could actually use a computer. They could surf the web. They could send email and stuff like that. The real problem came when it came to things they didn't do every day, okay? Adding new software was beyond their skills. Spam was something that came in a can. You made sandwiches out of it, A virus is something you treated with chicken soup. And backup was what the dad did with the car to put it in the parking place, okay? They didn't do those things every day, and if you tried to help them, you would write it down. They'd follow these things step by step. They get lost. It just made it very hard. But if it was something simple they did every day, reading mail, they could do that no problem. You know, surfing the web, finding things, they could do that. Now, if we think of a lot of people in the world, and it's just levels of this, okay? If we think of a lot of things in the world, how much time are we actually wasting? There's actually about 1.5 billion desktop computers in the world today. And if each one of us futzes with them for on the average of 15 minutes a day to get rid of viruses, to install new software, to get rid of spam, to, you know, we're trying to understand how this package works, we don't know it. 15 minutes a day, let's be easy on ourselves, $5 US. That's $7.5 billion a day that we're wasting because our computer software doesn't work the way it should. If you think I'm making this number up, I am not, okay? There's lots of different studies that show from different companies that say, like AMC, the company makes uninterruptible power supplies. They estimate that $618 million a day is lost in industry because people don't have uninterruptible power supplies hooked up to their desktop. There's a spike in the current, or the system reboots itself and the people lose everything they've got. This is a problem. We should be able to fix it. Large companies fix this problem. They have what is known as a systems administrator. And universities have systems administrators who help to fix some of these problems. But in the United States, 86% of the GDP in the private sector comes from small to medium business. And small businesses typically can't afford to have a systems administrator. What they do is they train a secretary, or worse yet, a boss, to try and do this work. You know, and they screw up because it's not their main focus in life. It's not what they do. And they're not trained to be security experts. They're not trained to be, you know, all these other things that they need to be. They're not trained to be a systems administrator. Another way of looking at this, because this is a very big number, it's hard for people to get their hands around it, is if you have 300 people working for you as knowledge workers, 300 people sitting behind a computer doing work for you, and they have to futz with their computer for 15 minutes a day, that's like 9 people never showed up for work. They didn't call in sick, they didn't say I'm on vacation and not getting training, they just never showed up. And if you were a manager, you'd be absolutely about this, okay? And you'd be all over them. You say, I'm going to fire your butt because you're not coming into work. Well, now let's say we take one of those 9 people and we simply say, we're going to train you to be a systems administrator, and magically 4 more people show up to work. You look at that and you say, that's a good investment. That's an investment that's worthwhile making, to train that person to be a systems administrator. The problem is that these companies are relatively small. In the United States, small business is defined as 1 to 50 people. Medium is 50 to 500. In Brazil, small is 1 to 30. Medium is 30 to 300. So if you're a small company, you're not going to train one person to take care of this, yet you're still losing this work. And I'm not talking, and I'm not even talking or addressing the concept of the I hate computer syndrome. We are strange people. Okay. Some of us even like computers. We like delving down in computers. We like trying to make them work faster and better. Most people, got good news for you, most people hate computers. Even people who use Apple computers hate computers, right? And so if we can make their experience better, if you can sit down and say, hey, all I have to do is sit down at the computer and I can do my work, and I can do my work faster and better, then they might actually start to like computers. And instead of dreading the contact with the computer, they actually want to have the contact with the computer. Maybe they're going to be watching even more porn. Okay? Now, I mean, to show you, I actually do go through and change slides of stuff. I was talking with Mark today at lunch, and he said the perfect thing. He said, these people are already paying for your service. It's just they're not getting the service. Because they're wasting $7.5 billion every day. That's almost enough to pay for a small war in Iraq. Okay? Now, I got a little test for you here. What do you think about when I say the word Brazil? Football, yeah. Yeah, all these are good. Maybe you think of piranha, okay? Yeah, all right, we have a winner in the first row. Piranha, you know, the Amazon River, stuff like that. Somebody mentioned football, of course, yeah. You know, think about that. You know, we call it soccer, they call it football. Maybe you think of, you know, sandy beaches, you know, and beautiful women. Sure, I'm not, you know, sexist about this, beautiful men, okay? Or maybe you think of Rio and Carnival and stuff. Oh, Carnival, I forgot Carnival, okay? Now, all of these things are what we think of, you know, in the United States about, you know, Brazil. But you know something? Actually, Brazil, this is Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is the second largest city in the Western Hemisphere after Mexico City. It has a density 6 times that of Manhattan. Look at all those tall buildings so close together and think about the fact that they're just packed full of apartments, condominiums, and small companies that may be 1 to 30 people. True, there are some companies that own the whole building, but there's a lot of them where there might be 20 or 30 or 50 different companies in there, none of whom have a systems administrator. And all of them are struggling with their systems. Now, a lot of people say the cloud will take care of that. The cloud will take care of that. The problem is, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of things that are still wrong with the cloud, okay? Security issues, issues of jurisdiction of laws. What happens when you have a cloud that is maintained or is owned by a company in the United States that's under U.S. law, and you happen to be living in a country that is called Cuba? You have a problem. Because legally speaking, that company cannot sell you any computer services at all. Or you're a country like Canada, who says, hey, I'm not going to let my university students use Google services because Google cannot guarantee that the United States will not look at my students' data under their laws. Okay? Issues around that. Now, the other thing about Latin America, Brazil in particular, is 86% of the people in the country live in this urban environment. Not just Sao Paulo, but other cities like Manaus, Curitiba, Porto Alegre, Foz do Iguaçu. And there's more and more people all the time. They expect that in a short time, 90% of the people in Brazil will live in this urban environment. Often in this urban environment, the internet is not miles away. I've known Nicholas Negroponte for a quarter of a century. He's the person who started the One Laptop Per Child project. It's a great project. I love the project. It's all about giving laptops to little children, cute little children in places like Africa, you know. And I says, Nicholas, you're giving the laptop to them, but where's the internet? Where's the electricity? All I see is planes with nothing on them. He says, turn around, John, it's behind you. There's a big power plant behind you with lots of internet stuff behind you. I says, no, there isn't. I turn around, there's just more planes and lions and stuff like that. You know, I was in Uruguay when they were deploying One Laptop Per Child. There were 6 of them going to this little village in Uruguay. At night, the only electric light in the entire village came from the laptops. Okay? And as a businessman, there's a slight problem giving them to the little children, cute little children, okay? Because as a businessman, you give a laptop to a child that's 7 years old. By the time they enter the workforce, they're 17. That's a 10-year payback on your investment. See, if I gave that same laptop to a 40-year-old who was out of work and just needed to be retrained so they get a decent job, so they get off of welfare and be a taxpayer, they had a 2-year payback. Okay? And here's a lot of people who are out of work because there's a lot of rich people and a lot of poor people living very close to each other, and the internet isn't 500 miles away. It's only 50 feet away. If we could bridge that last 50 feet, I could give a cheap internet device to all those people, and I could train them with internet-based training to have new jobs and get them off of welfare and make them taxpayers. One more definition to this. This is you. Like I said before, you're a geek. but that doesn't mean you're a nerd. And I run into geeks like this all the time. I go to a conference every year called FISLI. It's in Porto Alegre. 6,000 geeks show up at that conference, and they're all about free software. Brazil's been doing free software for a long time. The government uses free software. Industry uses free software. These people show up and they say to me, Mad Dog, I want to have a job where I can earn a living with free software. And so I started thinking about that. Of course, there's lots of different ways of doing that, but I wanted to be able to make this more systematic. So I said, I have an idea. I'm going to call it Project Cauã. So here's the goals of Project Cauã: to create millions, between 1 to 2 million high-tech technical jobs in the private sector, not government funded, in Brazil alone, with another 3 to 4 million high-tech jobs in the rest of Latin America if this works out. I want to make the computers easier to use. I want to make them very environmentally friendly. I want to create a wireless bubble over large urban areas that is both free as in freedom and free as in gratis. I want to reduce cellular contention. How many of you remember when AT&T was under the gun because the iPhone came out, right? All of a sudden you couldn't make a 3G telephone call in New York City because there were so many people downloading porn they just overwhelmed the site. Well, there's only one way of fixing that in reality, and that is to make your cells smaller, okay? If you make your cells smaller, there's fewer people downloading porn inside of each cell. That means you can have more porn inside of each cell being downloaded at a higher rate, okay? But the problem with that is that a lot of people don't like those antennas on the top of their building, and even if they do, it's very expensive to put up another one. It's $100,000 per antenna, and you have to bring fiber up to actually feed the signal up to that, or you have a microwave dish on the top, but that's kind of useless for lots of reasons. And so it's very expensive and very hard to make your cells smaller. We have figured out a way to have millions of picocells at no cost to a telephone company. And we want to have all of this being open and free. Oh, I forgot the supercomputing facility, gratis or very low cost. And we want to have this all open, both the hardware and the software, being open and free so it is sustainable. And talking about sustainable, all of this is funded through the private sector as a capitalistic type of business. So here's the model in a nutshell. Remember all those tall buildings in Sao Paulo? We're going to buy highly available servers in the basement of each one, running free and open source software to provide services such as mail, internet, and spam filtering and things like that. We're going to have an uninterruptible power supply and a generator in the basement of that building right next to those things so that if the power from the electric grid goes away, we still have the systems going. There's another interesting part about this, has to do with heating and cooling. If you concentrate all of the CPU power and the things that are generating lots of heat into one place, you can utilize that heat to do things like warm the water coming from the cold water supply before it gets into the boilers for the building, preheat the water, or simply preheat the swimming pool. Either one is fine. Then the next thing we want to do is bring high-capacity internet into the building. Talking to the telephone companies, telling them to bring 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 fibers into the building, because laying the fiber is the most expensive part. In talking with the telephone company, they were running into this problem. If there was one customer in the building who wanted that high-speed internet, it was simply too expensive for them to bring it in for that one customer. But if I could give them 300 customers at a time, then they say, well, yes, of course we can bring it in, no problem. So we're going to work on figuring out how to do that. We want to put thin clients throughout the building, having a hardwired Ethernet coming up to each thin client with power over Ethernet coming up so that each thin client actually gets power from the Ethernet. You don't have to plug it in. It gets its power that you can also use as uninterruptible power supplies in the basement to keep these things going. We'll see why that has to happen later on. We can also support fat clients. We can support Microsoft Windows. We can support Apple. We can give them lots of services. However, we're going to have to make sure that these people pay for the licenses that they're using. Now, one of the problems I have in selling free software down in Brazil and free software principles down in Brazil is that Brazilians look at me and they say, maddog, all of our software is free. Brazil pirates about 84% of their software. Vietnam pirates 96% of their software. China used to pirate 92% of their software. They're now down to 84% because the World Trade Organization says you have to clamp down on that. And the United States pirates 34% of its software. The richest country in the face of the earth, we still pirate 34% of our software. And some of this is inadvertent because it's really very hard to track software. If you go to a large company, you usually find 1 or 2 people whose sole job in life is to make sure that every piece of software is properly licensed with every system so that they don't get caught in a bind when the Business Software Alliance comes to them. The BSA, I'm not talking about Boy Scouts of America. These are the people who come around and do audits of your stuff, and if they find you're not using licensed software properly, you get it whacked with a really big fine. So, it's easy to understand why this happens, because basically the poorer the country, the less likely they are to be able to afford to pay $300 for a copy of Microsoft Office. And they're not stupid. They know it doesn't cost $300 to make that shiny plastic disc, because they can buy one just like that down at their corner piracy store for $1.95. But see, if they're using this, they actually have to pay for it because the person who owns the system, the person supplying this service, could get in a lot of trouble if they are helping people buy or pirate software. So, and they'll actually, hopefully, they'll be able to use the software better, so they'll be able to generate revenues that would pay for that software, which is actually the real goal, isn't it? We talked about the power of Ethernet, and each one of these thin clients would act as a part of a wireless mesh repeater. So every single thin client would have the ability to capture wireless signal and pass it on as necessary. Probably through the server and then out into the real internet. And you can have a high performance computing grid which is formed by these servers. Because sometimes when the servers are in an apartment house during the week, they're not used very much. When the servers are in the building, in the industry, during the weekend, they're not used very much. So you can sell off some of these spare CPU cycles and some of the spare memory and storage to be able to, you can in fact have a mid-cloud, a very, very distributed mid-cloud. So let's take the first one, creating millions of new jobs. Every single one of these server thin client configurations in this building would be owned by what we call a systems administrator entrepreneur. Somebody who's been trained to do systems administration, trained and certified and licensed to do systems administration. Somebody perhaps like you, or somebody who hasn't even had as much training and knowledge about computers as you. But if this is the type of job you want to have, you could have it. We would supply, Project Cauã would supply the business plans for people. We would tell them how to be able to go to the bank, borrow the money from the bank, buy the equipment, install the equipment, and start it up as a business. We would show them things about cash flow. We would give them second-level support so that they have somebody to call if they're having a problem. We would make sure that they were certified and licensed. Why licensed? Because they're going to be providing a service just like a telephone service. You have to be dependable. They're also going to be bonded, insured. So in case something goes wrong, they're protected and their customers are protected. Probably a couple $1 million of insurance for each one. So these are the types of things we're going to ask the systems administrators to do, and we're going to show them how to do it. We're going to set up the programs to do it for them. Now these people will go out and find customers. We'll talk a moment about the vertical markets we would like to address, but let's say one of the vertical markets is an apartment house. You've been living in that apartment house your entire life. All the neighbors know you. You're the kid down the hall. You're slightly weird, slightly geekish, but you're a nice kid. They know your mother and father. And you say, hey, I'd like to supply internet to this entire apartment house. Now, a lot of Brazilians have already been doing this. They get the internet from the telephone company and they put a little wireless router in, and the university students are selling the internet to their neighbors. But this is illegal. I'm legitimatizing it. I'm creating a business out of it. They're going to actually be able to do this legally, okay? And I've already talked with the telephone companies. They like this. What they're actually getting is an unpaid sales force. An unpaid sales force to sell internet services to all their customers. And not only that, but they also have an unpaid first line of support. No longer will the end user be calling up the telephone company saying, I'm having problems with my internet service. They're going to be talking to the systems administrator entrepreneur. And when that person calls up the telephone company, you don't start talking to them by saying, you know, is your mouse plugged in, is your CPU turned on, because they're going to be coming back to you and saying, hey, I have a problem with my router and, you know, and this protocol, and they're going to know what they're talking about. So telephone companies will see their cost of sales go from 36% down to 5%. They'll see their support costs drop even faster. They really like this program. The next thing the systems administrator will be trained how to do is how to go out and borrow money from a commercial bank. Now, the normal problem in Brazil of trying to borrow money to start a business is the banks don't like doing that because it's very risky. They don't like lending out money to a risky business. They want to wait until your business is already going when you don't need the money anymore. Then they'll lend you some money to build your business bigger, but you've already got a track record. The way you fix that is with what is known as an underwriting program. You get a larger bank to have a pool of money that if any one particular or two particular businesses fail, the bank that loaned the money gets their money back. How is this program funded? The program is funded because every single loan has a little bit of money that goes into this underwriting program that builds up a base so that someday, if one of the loans doesn't get paid back, that they get the money back through the underwriting program. That removes your risk completely. Now there's no reason for these commercial banks not to lend their money to somebody who's already certified and licensed and bonded to run this business. And we were talking to a couple of banks about that too. So finally, when all this stuff is set up and installed, and there will be companies who will specialize in installation, because installation is typically done one time in the life of a building. Or it may be that the networking is already built into the building, and all that happens is you have to install the thin clients and the server systems. But that'll happen one time, not multiple times. And then the people just start to lease these services to the end users. So in other words, the geek puts on the tie and becomes an entrepreneur. Now you don't have to really put on a tie. I put on a tie today. Mark, the guy I mentioned before, he said he had taken off his tie because he was told he had to be casual. But, you know, it really doesn't hurt that much. You know, if you tie it loose enough, you can still get blood flow to the brain. And, you know, in certain cases, you don't have to put on a tie because it really depends upon your customer base. If they've known you for a number of years inside your apartment house and you start putting on a tie, they're going to think you're strange. So, you know. But on the other hand, if you go out to a building and it has a whole bunch of companies in it, you might want to put on a tie for at least for a little bit till they get to know you. And then you could do sales to them. So there's going to be several different vertical markets we're going to go after. One of them is a kind of a general vertical market called small and medium business. We'll get to that in a moment. Another one is apartments and condominiums, to be able to provide to them internet services cheaper than what they're paying for today, and they get a systems administrator. Because right now they're buying all these services piecemeal. They're buying the computer piecemeal. They're buying the electricity. They're buying all this stuff. And they're actually paying more money than they could to get really great computer services, plus a systems administrator to help them use their systems. Hospitality. There are these small hotels in Brazil called pousadas. They're really great. A lot of times you get them right beside the ocean and stuff. They're kind of like a bed and breakfast place. They'd love to be able to give the same amenities to their customers as the large hotels do, the Hiltons and stuff like that, but they can't afford to. So what you can do is take a group of these, 2 or 3 of them that are close together, you put thin clients and server systems throughout, you have one systems administrator doing remote administration across these 2 or 3 posadas. That's how they make their living. How many of you have ever gone to a hotel that offers wireless services and you find out that you can see 12 wireless nodes but only 2 of them seem to be working? Yes. Okay. That wastes time and money. Okay. And with Project Cauã, we have the ability to ping those to make sure they're working. And if they're not, the systems administrator would go and make them work. This is the type of service we want. 70% of in-room revenue for any given hotel is generated through X-rated movies. You thought I was kidding about the porn, right? And so you go to the little façades, you say, hey, I can do this for you, do this for you, do this for you, and I can give you X-rated movies. Oh, X-rated movies, that's the way to go. Okay. Point-of-sale terminals. You see all these point-of-sale terminals around, but they're all typically very closed systems. It's very hard for people to do things like bulk load of data into the databases and things like that. We have open source point-of-sale systems out there, but they're complex. People don't know how to use them and stuff. We can put in point-of-sale terminals. So now, if you say that every thin client, basically every desktop, every point-of-sale terminal in Brazil has the potential of being a wireless mesh repeater, all of a sudden, which is completely open, all of a sudden you see the fact that your wireless bubble is going across an entire city. Let's do apartments and condominiums. What can we offer them? Well, first of all, regular desktop computing with a tie-in to the internet. Now, normally when you buy in your apartment, you buy internet, you get 1 megabit per second, 2 megabits per second, 15 megabits per second, maybe, okay, but that's what you're getting. Well, by using Project Cauã, I can deliver 300 megabits a second wirelessly with up to a gigabit per second, from the system up 10 gigabits a second. I can offer that in bursts. And we could also offer over-the-air digital TV. By putting a little dongle into a USB port, I can give them a TV tuner that they can get over-the-air TV. Of course, IPTV and IP radio stations from around the world. I give the voice over IP. I can put an Asterisk system in the basement and allow people to have a voice over IP system and very low costs of international calls, things like that. I could put in automation to control the lights and heat in the systems. Now, in a lot of US buildings, you have central air conditioning. You have central this, central that. In Brazil, you tend to have wall air conditioners, okay, with each one having their own little control, maybe an infrared thing that controls them or an RF thing that controls them. I can build that into the client so that they can get much more central air-like support out of the system. When they leave the building, I turn it off. They save money. Security system. We can set up security systems, do all sorts of, and because the thin client is on all the time, the security system is on all the time. There's another reason for the systems administrator to be licensed and bonded is because they're going to help to continue to run that security system. Do all the typical things you want on this. The hospitality function, all the typical things you would have in an apartment, including in-room porn, and a good reservation system, good room allocation system, a good ERP system that these places never had. They can have all of this stuff now, plus a systems administrator to train them how to use it and keep it running. Small and medium business, as I said before, is typically 1 to 30 people in Brazil. Small and medium business generates approximately 86% of the gross domestic product of a company in the private sector, non-agricultural. Okay? That's a lot of money. In the United States, 90% of the patents are actually generated by small to medium business. If you want to use patent generation as a measure of IT, of intellectual property and innovation, 90% of the patents are generated by small companies, people like you who have a great idea. So this shows how valuable this market segment is. And they can't afford a systems administrator. So we can support all 3 major operating systems in doing the basic services, doing backups, things like that for them. Plus, I can give them an administrator who will become intimately familiar with their business and continually go out and say, here's some new software that could really help you out. And not only can I install it for you and keep it up to date, but I can train you in how to use it. And that's a very valuable thing for a company. We can create, in effect, a time-sharing environment. The first speaker who was talking about the cloud computing from Microsoft was talking about cloud computing. He talked about mainframes and thin clients. I'm sorry, those were mainframes and dumb terminals. And they were using something called time sharing. And let me tell you, as far as I was concerned, that was the sweetest part of computing there ever was. Because when you came in the morning, all you had to do was turn on that dumb terminal, log in, and you could do your work. And there was somebody else who installed software for you, and there was somebody else who did backups for you, and there was somebody else who looked out all, and all you had to do was your work, and life was sweet. And then two people, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, come along and put a mainframe computer on everybody's desk with no training and said, "Good luck, sucker," and we've been living with that ever since. So we're going back to this time-sharing model, which works quite well. But it's a time-sharing model where everything is working with virtualization. So if you want to tailor it to what you want, you can, because you have a virtual machine you can work with that you can create your own environment. And for the most part, we hope, you'll be dealing with free and open source software, so you can do that too. So as far as environmentally friendly, we want to reduce the amount of electrical utilization, we want to extend the life of computers, and we want to make sure they're not using any dangerous chemicals in them. This is Itupu. This is the world's largest hydroelectric plant. It exists on the border between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. This almost bankrupted Brazil in building this. It took over 20 years to build this puppy. It generates 14 gigawatts of electricity every hour. At a 350 watt per desktop computer, that means it can power 40 million desktop computers. Well, not really. That's a lie. It's a lie because Brazil is one of those countries that's very tall, north to south, it's settled around the equator. A lot of it's very hot. And in reality, when you have that desktop computer in your room, you need an air conditioner to help you cool the room. And that air conditioner uses about 2 watts of power to cool for every 1 watt of power it sticks into the computer, because that computer is like a nice little electric space heater. And you go into a Brazilian office and you see a whole bunch of desktop computers, maybe 10 of them in a row, and over top of them they've got a whole bunch of these window or wall air conditioners, you know, trying to blow the hot air out. So if you can reduce the amount of wattage that is used in the desktop, you also reduce the amount of wattage that's used in the air conditioners to cool the room. That's a win. And you put that heat in a place where you can use it, as I said before, to warm the water coming into your hot water system. Now, we are using as a design center a thin client that uses 10 watts of power or less. And this is still a thin client that can do things like show your videos, 1080p, full scale, you know, multi-frame, stuff like that. Completely virtualized type of thin client, so you can run applications in it. We're also going to use green monitors. There's a monitor right now from LG, a 22-inch monitor, not the hugest in the world, but 22-inch monitor that uses only 20 watts. That's when it's working. When it's in standby mode, it uses 1/3 of a watt. So altogether, your thin client and your LCD monitor, when it's working full bore, would be using 30 watts of power instead of 350 watts of power. The other thing about it is it'd be completely diskless and fanless. So it's very quiet. Now, the interesting thing about a quiet computer that uses such a small amount of electric power is the fact that you don't have to turn it off. Most of the people in the world that have desktop computers turn them off because they use a lot of electric power, they're very noisy, and they're worried about wearing out their fan or their disk drive. You know, the fan is the first thing to go, right? And your disk drive the second. And if you live near the coastline where there's a lot of salt in the air, or you live on a boat where there's a lot of salt in the air, the average life of a desktop fan is about 1.5 years. Disk drive goes right after that. Corrosion from the salt. But if you remove all that stuff, and you can filter the air and everything, then you can have a much longer lifetime. And because it's using such a small amount of electricity, you tend to use it all the time. This is very valuable because, you know something, when you turn off a computer, it's less useful than a boat anchor. You know, I know that because I have a boat. I toss a boat anchor over the shore and it holds my boat in place. But I used to toss my old computers over the side and they would drag along. You know, they didn't do a good job at all. My boat would drift towards the rocks. So an old computer turned off is less useful than a boat anchor. But we're going to leave ours on all the time. And it's going to be only 12 volt. Why 12 volt? 12 volts is the magic voltage. You know, car batteries are 12 volts. You can get refrigerators 12 volts. You can even get microwave ovens 12 volts. So by having a 12 volt thing, you can go out and you can have it out in the woods. You can have it in the same place we're putting those little laptops, because there's lots of 12 volt alternators that come from broken cars that you can hook up to a water wheel or bicycle, or it's 12 volt solar panels that you don't need to boost the voltage up and down. If we really think about it, our desktop systems are really horrible. We have 110 volts coming out of the wall. We bring it into our desktop system. It goes through this dongle, which takes it down to 12 volts, and those things are really bad in energy conversion. Or we bring it into our desktop system, which has the power supply inside. We bring it all the way down to 12 volts, and we lose a lot in the conversion there. So by having these systems use 12 volts, you can do your conversion where you can make it really, really efficient. In fact, it actually gets worse. If you have an uninterruptible power supply, you plug that into the wall, it takes it down to 12 volts, charges the batteries, then you run it off the 12 volt supply, brings it up to 110 volts, brings it in, takes it down to 12 volts. Just make it 12 volts. It'll be fine. But we want it to also be multifunction. There's a lot of thin clients around that all they do is display X, or they display some type of protocol and stuff. We want our thin client to actually be able to run things. And we want to be able to run multiple things in a virtualized environment. One of the things that's going to be running is software somewhat along the lines of open work. So it could be a wireless mesh router in a virtualized environment, in a virtualized network that's completely separate from anything else you're doing on the system. And that means that you're completely protected because nobody else can even see what you're doing. They don't even know that it's there. Okay? And if you actually want to connect to the internet, you now have to go through your virtualized router, which is going to have a firewall on it to protect you from the outside world. Now, because all this is virtualized, it's a no man's land. And consequently, there's nobody who's really responsible for it. That's okay. That means you can't be sued for other people doing bad things with this virtualized network. And that's why you're not going to have to sign this little thing that says, I'm going to sign away my life just to be able to use a little bit of free Wi-Fi. We're also going to build into it a femtocell. A femtocell is like a cellular modem that allows your telephone to connect to it. I've been using GSM telephones ever since cellular telephones came out. Of course, the United States was mostly using CDMA way back, but I chose a GSM telephone because I traveled to so many other countries. CDMA originally was only used in the United States and Japan. So I chose GSM. This meant that I could get telephone calls all over the world except in my house. Right, you know, even today I have a very weak signal in my house. However, if I buy a femtocell, then when I use my cellular telephone, it doesn't talk to the cellular telephone tower, it talks to my femtocell unit. My femtocell transmits that into TCP/IP, which goes to the telephone company and goes back into the cellular telephone network. So I can have a really good signal, really good connectivity, and really good speed if my TCP/IP link was fast enough to be able to carry all of that. Using Project Cauã, it will be. The other nice advantage of that is because my cell phone is no longer talking to a tower that's 2 miles away, I can actually get it to reduce the amount of power it's using. And that does 2 things. Makes my battery last longer and makes my brain not be fried as much. So we're going to put a femtocell in there, and like I said, no noise, no fan, no moving disk, long life. Oh, I've even removed the time of year clock battery off of this. It has no battery on it. Why? Because it's always going to be connected up to the internet. As soon as I start to boot, I go out to the internet. What time of day is it? Okay, set it. I don't need a battery on there. So this has a lifetime, a shelf life of almost infinity, and a real working life of probably 9 to 10 years. We're going to build these thin clients locally. Brazil has this really protective tariff. They charge 100% duty on anything coming into the country as a finished product. This is a problem for people making GDP about half of ours. So we're going to build the thin client locally. And we're going to make the thin client so that it doesn't have all the legacy crap that every computer system on. No serial lines, no USB 2.0, no parallel ports, none of that crap, okay? We're only going to put on there what people really want to have put on there: CPU, memory, decent audio system, some video stuff for 2 displays, and then everything else is going to be USB 3.0. Oh, one more thing. A very high-speed wired Ethernet port that does power over Ethernet, and everything else is going to be USB 3.0. If I want another display, there are USB video displays. If I want to have a serial port, there's USB serial ports, parallel ports, everything else I need. Wi-Fi keeps changing every 6 months. I can plug in another USB 3.0 Wi-Fi, hardwired Ethernet port, and when I have another hardwired USB 3.0, it'll handle it. So I have a lot of flexibility with that. We're going to have this designed by the University of Sao Paulo. They will then license out the design at $2 to $4 to about 800 different companies inside of Brazil that can manufacture these. And these companies will now compete based on manufacturing prowess, warranty, sales price, stuff like that, instead of saying, I can't design this because I can't afford the $2.4 million it costs to design a board like that, have it licensed, and everything else. It's going to be a completely open BIOS. We're going to use Core Boot. And so we have an open BIOS that we can fix for the next foreseeable time. Anything that new devices come along that have to be boot, we can change the BIOS to accept it. And we're going to manufacture them in local factories. This gets around the import duty of 100%. We'll only be paying an import duty of 6% on the parts that we have to bring into Brazil. We won't need to bring in printed circuit boards. We can make them there. We can manufacture a lot of parts. CPUs, maybe, unless, of course, we form a fab inside of Brazil to do that. This creates not only more jobs and expertise inside of Brazil, which is something they need. As far as the servers go, we're going to have 3 different styles of servers. I call them Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear. Mama Bear and Papa Bear are going to be standard servers. You can buy them from IBM, HP, stuff like that, supporting open source, all open source drivers. We're working with them to specify those. Baby Bear is kind of different. It's going to take 2 of the thin clients, put them together, put a heartbeat between them. Remember the USB 3.0 is good for heartbeat. It's also good for putting in disks and stuff like that. So you'll be able to have a little server running off of 12 volts, which would be able to run other thin clients. If you're out in a remote installation and you need to make if one of the size fails, you want to make it stable again, you can sacrifice one of your thin clients to rebuild the server and start it back up again. For people that buy a Mama Bear and the load gets heavier and heavier and they can't expand it any further, they want to buy a Papa Bear, there's going to be lots of other systems administrators just starting off who would be happy to have the Mama Bear, buy it from them wholesale, and then be able to put it into place. So we'll have a ability to sell these, move them up, so that they won't simply be thrown away. If you have a server system and it's under contract from the vendor, basically the life of that server system is guaranteed for as long as the vendor is willing to be able to service it, which is a very long time. So in a lot of times at the end of that service agreement, the vendor will say, look, it's getting too expensive for us to maintain this server. We'll just give you a new server, which will have equal or greater capabilities, and then we'll start the service contract up on that. So what you've done is you've turned your server purchase from a capital purchase into an expense purchase, which is done every year for the price of your maintenance contract, which typically goes down anyway. Now, talk about the wireless mesh. Most people talk about wireless mesh. There's a problem with wireless mesh and the fact that there's latency that goes with it. You go from hop to hop to hop to hop. Every hop introduces latency. Typically, wireless mesh repeaters have only one antenna. They can either transmit or receive at one time. So basically, whatever your throughput is of the base technology, you've cut it in half because you're either receiving or you're transmitting. Well, wireless mesh is great because it helps you extend distances. but for the most part, all these distances with Cauã are going to be more like a wireless LAN. One hop at most, then you're into a wired network where you can apply quality of service to it. So we're going to be able to go supply the wireless mesh capability, but hopefully most of the time it's used more like a LAN so that the throughput is kept up. Let's see. We're going to use, how many of you have ever heard of the FON project? F-O-N? FON was where they had all these little routers that they were selling that basically had some great software in it. They had these two models that basically if you had a FON system, you could give away wireless internet to your friends and neighbors or people who traveled along, or you could sell it to them. If you gave it away, then when you went to another FON place, you could use that wireless for free. If you sold it, you'd pay a little bit of money to the other FON person and you would be able to get wireless support there. But at least you would have wireless support wherever you went. The free model was called the leanest model. The paid-for model was called the bill model. I think you can figure that out. We're going to use the same thing. It worked. People did it. We're going to use the same thing, except if you want to have more wireless support than 1 to 2 megabits a second, you can pay for it. But everybody would be able to get 1 to 2 megabits a second for free. The thing is, if you're having delivered to you 100 megabits a second, a gigabit per second, you're really not going to miss 1 to 2 megabits a second. And that's if you could be guaranteed that when you go some other place, you get the 1 to 2 megabits a second from your wireless device. Supercomputing grid. As I said, most of these servers are going to be multi-core. Intel right now is coming out, is trying 128 core CPUs. That's a lot of cores. And they're going to be sitting there most of the time idle. So why not make use of them? And if you set it up so that people can do that, then people who are in industry who need to run simulations can do that at a very, very low cost. University students can run fantastic programs without having to be a drain on the university's needs. So we're going to do this, we're going to manage it, and I've actually found a company in France who is willing to buy extra CPU cycles, and they will pay for those cycles by paying for the internet that connects those systems together. So we can actually reduce the cost of the internet for the end users by selling off the CPU cycles to the people that need them. So what about the training for this? If I'm going to have, if I take this to full capacity, 100% penetration into the Brazilian urban market. Now I understand, I've been in business for 40 years. I know that 100% of anything is hard to do. But if I was to do that, then that means I have to train 10,000 system administrator entrepreneurs, certify them every month for the next 6 years to reach steady state. That's a lot. That's why we're going with LPI certification instead of training. Let people get the training any way they want to. We'll provide the training materials on the internet for free, allow them to use YouTube videos and stuff, kind of like Khan University, okay, to get their training. You can take an inexpensive PC, start up a virtualized environment, and set up some virtual clients and a server, highly available server. And you can practice on that till the cows come home. You go and you get your certification. Now, some people can't learn that way. That's okay. We're also setting up an apprenticeship program. I have a friend of mine in Argentina who's done some training. He's setting up an apprenticeship program where an apprentice can go and work with one of the already existing system administrator entrepreneurs to learn the systems administration, go get their certification, and then become an entrepreneur themselves. We're going to have, this is a job you're going to be learning your entire life. You're not just going to be able to stop learning when you've bought your system. You're going to continue to learn. You're going to continue to investigate new software, new hardware, new techniques to keep doing this. Project Cauã is going to continue to send out notices to you saying, look, there's this new stuff you should be thinking about. And we'll be, and so you're going to be learning your entire life to do this. I hope you like learning, because that is something you're going to be doing. If you don't learn it, if you don't believe that, and if you don't like learning, I got some bad news for you already. I think one of the speakers said today, you're already in trouble. Okay. So we're going to provide second level support. There's going to be forums and mailing lists and things like that for people that need help, need to get stuck. Remember, I'm going to have 2 million systems administrators out there, right? 2 million people. If you go to SourceForge right now, you look at the number of software packages out there, 430,000 software packages, and over 2 million free software developers. I'm going to double that number in Brazil alone. And I'm going to double it again in the rest of Latin America. And those people are going to be smart. They're going to be looking for ways to improve the software, to improve the solutions for their customers, because their customers are going to pay them for it. So how much will a systems administrator make? The average starting systems administrator in Brazil makes about $1,000 a month. A good one makes about $2,000 a month. If I can find, if the systems administrator entrepreneur has 300 thin clients hooked up to their system, charges $6 per thin client every month that goes into their pocket for support, that means that they can make a good salary every month just from that. Now, how many of you have ever heard of LTSP, Linux Terminal Server Project? Linux Terminal Server Project is a lot like Project Cauã. Diskless systems on top of a server. We have a centralized method of management. LTSP systems in universities have been seen to have 22,000 separate logins, 5,000 thin clients, with 64 servers being run by 1.5 systems administrators. Now, I don't know where they get the half the systems administrator, and I don't know how much work that person does. But I'm talking about 300 thin clients being supported on one highly available server with, 300 or 400 people who might log in. So we estimate that this type of job in steady state would probably take about 10 hours a week for somebody to do things like monitor disk space, monitor CPU utilization, monitor some logs, repair a few systems that have gone bad, do some expansion. The other 30 hours a week, they could be doing other things. Web work, programming, helping their customers, giving classes to them, things like that they can make more money. And if there's a person who works very hard, we estimate that they can make about $4,000 a month, which, believe me, is a really great salary in Brazil. At the same time, they're providing these services cheaper than the people can buy them if they buy them off the street. I'm not even talking about the systems administration part, just the hardware and the connectivity. So how do they go about doing this? As I said before, they go out and they get loans to buy it. They can get it from a commercial bank. They can get it from friends and family. We estimate that 300 thin clients with a decent service system would probably cost about $150,000 to $200,000 installed with the networking in a building. So $200,000, that's about what you pay for a house. And it's not that gigantic of a loan. And it would be paid, the hardware part would probably be paid back in a 3-year period. After that point, the person could use the money that they borrowed from the bank to be able to expand the server system or to replace some thin clients to gain long in the tooth, things like that. The loans would be underwritten, and there's other funding models that you can do. For example, if a building is in the process of being built, you can go to the building and talk to the building manager and say, hey, you put in the networking. I don't want to have to pay for that. You own the networking. And you supply a series of racks in the basement, and I'll just bring in the servers and the thin clients. That reduces the cost of the loan dramatically. If it's a condominium that's being set up, that's a series of houses in a condominium, then you talk to the people putting that in, and you say, when you run the electric wires, you also run the fiber to each house. And we're actually working with the Brazilian government on one of those models right now. The Brazilian government wants to bring in fiber optic to every single house in the town, every single office in the town. And they say, what can you do for us? We say, instead of having that wire go all the way from the central office of the telephone company, put a separate office there where we put the entrepreneurs. Then they can provide services above and beyond what the telephone company can even dream of to the end user. And the government's working with us on that. So there's lots of other different models. But this is the basic model. Because this is a licensed business, it belongs to them. I've seen many, many government projects typically in third world countries, where the government says, oh, we have a grant, we'll buy this equipment, we'll train a systems administrator, the systems administrator will take care of the equipment, and will teach your students and everything how to do this. And then what happens is, the systems administrator says, hey, I've been doing this job for a year, I'm getting paid a small amount of money, maybe the government contract runs out, the government fund runs out. He says, I can make more money by going to the city and being a systems administrator. They leave, nobody is trained behind them. All, the people that are in charge of the town get worried about the equipment, they turn it off, they lock the door. Sooner or later, somebody breaks into the wall, steals all the equipment anyway, and everything's gone. But here, this is a business. The person has an investment. If they want to leave and go some other place, they find somebody who buy the business from them. That person's now buying a running business. They go to the bank, they borrow the money, they pay off all the loan that exists, and they pay a nice sum to the person that they can then take with them to form another business. Nobody is going to walk away from this business. That's why it is sustaining. And if they do, there'll be plenty of people who'll be glad to take it over. It's like taking over a mortgage on a house, right? They'll be glad to take it over. So how large is this project? There's 194 million Brazilians. 86% of them live in an urban environment, so it's 167 million people. If you say, I'd like to have a thin client for everybody at home and at work and at home and at school, and remember, this is a thin client that's basically going to be doing a lot of other things. It's going to be managing your wireless services, managing your security, stuff like that. It's about 400 million thin clients, and you add in about 70 million point-of-sale terminals. That's a lot of systems. And in Brazil alone, probably about 2.6 million servers. So it's a big project, but it's all cookie cutter. You do it once for one building, you do it for 300. We're going to be publishing everything on the server to tell people how to do this business. Nobody's going to have to ask permission of Project Cauã to be able to go off and start their own business. We're currently in discussions with Telefonica as a telephone company in Latin America and throughout Brazil. They're helping us with doing, making the business models around supplying the services and stuff like that. I've been talking with the Brazilian government, the Minister of Communications, and we've been talking with various banks. Caixa Econômica Federal is the state bank of Brazil, the second largest bank in Brazil. They have two charters. They run the lottery system. By the way, they do that with Linux and free software. And they run the welfare system. Oh, by the way, they do that with Linux and free software. And part of their charter is to take people off of Social Security and welfare and make them taxpayers. So they're very interested in this project. Bank of Brazil is another bank, a semi-private bank in Brazil, who's also interested in being the underwriting. And these banks will make money from the underwriting program. They actually make money from it. And we're talking with various housing things. Besides the government-sponsored project I told you about before, there's this project in Brazil called Pedra Branca, which is a very interesting, environmentally friendly project of building high-value residential and light industry tied together, so people don't have to take cars and go from place to place. They can walk from their homes to their businesses and to their industry. Current status. In November, in fact in 2 weeks, I'm going to this place called Latinoware in Brazil. We're going to be gathering up 50 LPI certified level 2 people and saying to them, would you like to work with us to be entrepreneurs on this? We're starting off with a very simple system. It's a home theater multimedia system based on XBMC. But we're going to show them how to sell this. We're going to provide them with marketing materials. We're going to, marketing materials both for the end user, marketing materials for them, marketing materials for the bank, so that the bank understands what's going on. We're going to allow them to try and sell and sustain 100 systems per systems administrator. They can sell more if they want to, but our goal is 100 per person. Because our biggest stumbling block is the disbelief that geeks could actually be good salespeople and run their own business. That's our biggest stumbling block. People say, oh, we see all this. It scales really well. You know, it just does. But they don't believe that you people could actually go out and sell this stuff and be your own business person. I have more faith in you than they do. So if that works, then we're going to spend 2 months for that, see what happens. If that works, then we start version 1.0 of the project in January. We run a 3-month pilot on that to make sure that we can actually install the servers, get them put into place, run the thin client, stuff like that. If that works successfully, and we think it would, then we open it up completely and allow lots of people. At the same time, we start to run these same pilots in Spanish-speaking countries. So we're going to do a pilot for every single vertical market in Brazil first. As soon as we find out that the pilot is working and stable, we then translate all the materials into Spanish. We do a pilot in the Spanish-speaking countries to see if there's any idioms there in the culture, and then we run that through. And then we sweep up through. Now, this is our board of directors. Every single person on here is a Brazilian business person, except that person. He is Argentinian. He is the person who's doing the apprenticeship program in Argentina. I, of course, am not Brazilian, and neither is Jody Newman. Jody is a lawyer who's an expert on international telecommunications law. He's there to keep us honest. But all the rest of these, Dr. Marcelo Zufo is a chief professor at the University of Sao Paulo. He's the one who's going to be having his staff design and implement our thin clients for us. Oh, by the way, the University of Sao Paulo has their own atomic power plant. They have their own line for making integrated circuits. They have their own surface mount technology machine. That's the same machine that's used by LG in making of their cell phones. They have 100,000 students at the university with 16,000 PhDs. This is our very small technical team at the moment. We're going to build this out rapidly as we find out who else we need on our technical team. The interesting thing about Project Cauã, unlike one laptop per child, I don't need to invent any new hardware. It already exists. It'd be nice if I could change it to meet my needs closer, but I can go with off-the-shelf components that exist today. I don't need to write any new software. It all exists. All I have to do is integrate it. I thought I was going to be creating my own distribution. And then all of a sudden, one night I woke up in a wonderful thing. It was not a nightmare, it was the opposite of a nightmare. It was a beautiful dream. And all of a sudden I realized I don't need a distribution. I can use a current distribution and just feed in a very neat installation script which will tell that distribution how to build whatever I want to build. And if you can do something by sitting at the console of a system and giving it commands to tell it how to build it, then I can create an installation script that will do that. And so instead of having a 16 gigabyte distribution that I have to build servers for and stuff, I have a 1 megabyte installation file that you aim at the system and it installs itself. So how does this affect you? I am fairly sure, because we've done a lot of models, that this will work in Brazil and in the rest of Latin America because of the density, because of the way that people work, because of the amount of money they make. But what I don't know is how it works in Manhattan or Watts or inner city Chicago or inner city Detroit, because the amount of money that beginning systems administrators make is different there. Beginning systems administrators tend to make a lot more money than $48,000 a year. So I don't know that I can entice systems administrators to do that job. But one of the target markets for us is not the existing systems administrator. One of the target markets for us is the chronically unemployed. And not only that, but this is a job that in steady state could be done by people like single parents, people that can't leave their kids at home, because they could do this job in steady state from their own apartment. And if they needed help in doing some specific thing, they could hire somebody to do that. This job could also be done by physically challenged people, people in wheelchairs. It makes it difficult for them to get out. It could be done by people from their bed. And I've seen people do that, people be good systems administrators who could not even get out of a wheelchair. As long as you can think, as long as you have the drive, you could do this job. So that's something that we're aiming for. We're not limiting it to those people, but there are people definitely going to be there. I'm talking to people from the favelas, the slums of Rio de Janeiro, where a friend of mine has been training kids in the favela to be web server people, to do web design, to do websites, to be systems administrators. And you know what he tells me? He says, last year, all the kids were talking about drugs and guns. This year, they're all talking about web and internet. And I can take those kids and say, you pick out an office building, you pick out an apartment house, you go out there, you put on your tie, you sell this to them, and now you can bring money into the favela. And when you bring money into the favela, all of a sudden there's magical things that happen because people now have money from something other than drugs. So, we have a whole bunch of people in Washington, D.C. that all they can seem to say is battle with each other and call each other names. So if you want to do me a favor, you can write to all of your representatives. You can say, why don't you people get off your butt, stop asking, and start looking at something like this to really generate some jobs, really build up the infrastructure and really help people who are already paying for this. They're already paying because their software and their hardware doesn't work the way it should, and it never will. Nah, I'm dreaming. So there we go. Go for it. We're going to be publishing everything on the web, everything as we develop it, all the documentation, all the training materials. The only thing you'll have to do is to be certified, licensed, and bonded, because this is a serious job. You're going to be providing telephony services for people who need to dial 911. You're going to be providing security for people. This is how you find information about Project Cauã. We need to upgrade the website considerably because things have been happening very fast, but we're going to start doing that a lot more frequently now. Why the eagle? Cauã is a Tupi Indian word for eagle. Brazil has one of the largest eagles in the world. And the eagle is a very fierce bird, a very free bird, so we chose the emblem of the eagle flying against the sun. The other reason is that my Brazilian godson's name is Cauã. You can see right there, he doesn't really have a penguin with a Brazilian flag tattooed on his arm. I do have a tux tattooed on my arm. But this is Cauã. And by the time he's 15, 16 years old, I'd like him to be able to make a living or think about making a living as a Project Cauã entrepreneur. So one more thing I'd like to talk about. Project Cauã is actually my next to last project. My last project is actually maddog's monastery and marina of math, music, microcomputing, microbrewing, micro winery, micro distillery, and bake shop. And if any of you who are in undergraduate stuff in about 10 years decide to go for your graduate degree, you can look me up because we're going to have about 30 students put together, each matriculated to a different university over the internet, each learning a different university's ideas and stuff. At night, we all come together, sit on the porch, drink beer that we brewed ourselves, talk about the ideas. If we get a good idea, we put it into an incubator, create a company, and all we want is 4% of the profits of your company. And after we've had 25 good ideas, then I have 100% of the profits of a very distributed, diversified company to keep the mansion going for the rest of time. So that'll be my last project, and I hope that, I know I'll enjoy it. Thank you very much. If you want, we can try and have questions and comments for whatever time I've got left, if I have any. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You said your thin clients will have no sound, right?
Pardon me?
You said your thin clients will have no sound coming out of them?
No sound, right.
Yeah. Are you going to replace your hard drive with SSDs?
No, it's not going to have a hard drive. It's going to boot over the internet. You're going to have at least a gigabit per second coming out from the server, or maybe even 10 gigabits per second, depending upon the cost of the Ethernet. At 10 gigabits per second, you're going to boot very fast. I mean, if necessary, if we find out that a little bit of SSD or something like that would speed it up, but I don't think we're going to need to have that, really. Yes, sir?
Now you talk about wireless bubble over the Sao Paulo. What do you think, like technical challenges going down?
I couldn't hear the last part.
How do you think we implement? What are the technical challenges to implement the wireless over the
Well, remember, every single thin client is actually a wireless mesh repeater, but because they're all hooked back through the servers, every single one will know where the other one is located. So you can do balancing of power and stuff like that. You can do balancing of frequencies and channels that they're communicating over. And you can reduce the amount of electrical power that each one's using until finally they don't have any real overlap. So it actually becomes a lot simpler problem than people would think. I mean, today, if you walk down the streets of Sao Paulo, you see many wireless spots. The real problem with them is that they're all protected. You can't connect to them. And even if they're open, you have to do something like say, oh yeah, I'm going to obey your rules and stuff before you actually get connected to the internet. And part of that is because of legal and liability issues that people have, you know, if people start using it for spam. I don't think you should be punishing the carrier for what people are doing. You punish the person who's running the services provision if they're providing bad services. You punish the end user who's doing the problem. But the carrier? That's like punishing the telephone company because somebody is yelling obscenities over a telephone wire. That's crazy. You know, you don't punish that. And then as soon as you do that, then you remove the need for having to say, yes, I'm going to be, you know, I have to agree to your terms and services of using this. As far as monitoring or eliminating the amount of traffic, you can do that through quality of service issues. Okay? I think I'm running out of time. I'm going to leave here so the next speaker can do it. We'll go outside. You can ask as many questions as you want. Okay? Thank you very much.